It really is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Secretary Ben Carson. He's the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Secretary. For nearly 30 years, Secretary Carson served as the Director of Pediatric Neurology at Johns Hopkins Children's Center, a position that he assumed when he was just 33 years old, becoming the youngest major division director in the hospital's history. Dr. Carson has received dozens of honors and awards in recognition of his achievements, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. In 2017, he was sworn in as the 17th Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Ben Carson.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you, Judge Moore, and thank you for NACo for hosting this event today. I'm delighted to speak with you about the many ways that HUD partners with counties across the country to help Americans access safe, fair, and affordable housing. Today, under the President's leadership, our nation is very strong economically. Record low unemployment, historic highs in the national economy, unprecedented job growth, and most Americans now have a feeling of optimism that's really been unparalleled in recent memory. We do have economic cycles, the professional economists tell us, and that we're going to have ups and downs, and it's just a cyclical pattern like everything else. That may be true to some degree, but I think the bigger factor is, do we have people who actually understand the economy and how it works? And we tend to get those people in office sometimes, and then we get people who have no concept of how it works, and it goes back down and comes back up. So yes, we do have cycles. And, but our mission is to extend good economic cycles to all Americans, particularly many of those who've been left behind in the past. And our programs strive to empower local governments and organizations so that you can better serve your communities, especially the most vulnerable among us who need our help the most. We have a new tool to help us accomplish this mission. I hope you've all heard about it, the Opportunity Zones. And this was created by the 2017 Tax Cuts and Job Bill. And basically gives governors in all 50 states, as well as 5 territories in the District of Columbia, the ability to designate 25% of their most severely economically distressed areas as these opportunity zones. There's 8,761 of them. And in these places, 35 million Americans live, so more than 10% of our population. And they're structured to serve the local communities over the long term. Investors who commit their unrealized capital gains for 5, 7, or 10 years or more receive tax benefits proportional to the length of time. The difference being that other programs in the past have been structured in a way that people could make investments in some of these places, reap some benefit, and then leave. So they're like here today and gone tomorrow. And over the long term, that economically distressed community does not benefit. In this situation, you have a much longer term situation. And when you invest your capital for the long term, obviously you're going to be interested in making sure that that capital does well. So you're going to be also looking at some of the peripheral issues that are going around your investment and doing everything you can to make sure that those are successful. So that really means that new growth becomes consistent growth, and new jobs become steady jobs. You know, we're also revamping Section 3 of the Fair Housing Act. Section 3 says if you're receiving HUD funding, you have an obligation to hire, train, and give contracts to the low-income people in that area. But it was encumbered by so much complexity that not many people wanted to use it. And even though it had been on the books for 50 years, it's been underutilized. So by redoing it, and the new rules will all be ready for use within the next couple of months, it'll be much easier for people to use them. And they also will have some teeth in them, some requirements. But this will give us an opportunity to get people who actually live in these distressed areas the kinds of job skills, the kinds of training which will actually lift them out of poverty, give them an opportunity to experience the American dream. And those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. We need to also be thinking about some of the rules and regulations that keep people mired in poverty. For instance, if you make more money and you're getting rental assistance, your rent goes up. If you bring another income-producing person into your household, your rent goes up. Don't even think about getting married. You might not just have your rent go up, you might lose your subsidy altogether. These are not things that really promote self-sufficiency. They don't really promote climbing the ladder of opportunity. And in the long run, it's those kinds of things that are harmful to our nation. So consider the role of opportunity zones in the context of development plans in your own counties and how you might align those plans with the value unlocked by the opportunity zone tax incentive. County officials may now be better equipped to attract private investment into their local communities by aligning the transportation projects, urban development areas, city centers, employment hubs, and other land use plans within the opportunity zones that maximize the returns for both the county as a whole as well as its most vulnerable residents. We're always looking for win-win situations. You know, no one really has to lose in this situation. People get tax breaks, and we invest in communities that have long been neglected. And you know, there are people who are always saying, I don't like this because rich people are getting an advantage. You know what? I don't care who gets an advantage as long as everybody gets an advantage. We have to start thinking like that again in this country. And, you know, you think about how rapidly this country developed. This is absolutely the last place on earth that we should be entertaining class warfare. The last place. Because think about what happened in this country. You had very wealthy individuals like the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Mellons and the Fords and the Kellogg's, and, you know, what did they do? Unlike the land barons of Europe who just hoarded money and passed it down from generation to generation, our very wealthy people invested in our country. They built the transcontinental railroad and the seaports and the textile mills and the factories and the mechanism that allowed the development of the most powerful middle class the world has ever seen, which rapidly took us to the top of the world economically. But that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. They also built schools and libraries, universities, museums, and things to improve the quality of life for our citizens. And that has always been the case, and that's the difference between us and a lot of other places. You look at the charitable giving in this country versus other countries. You look at the nonprofit organizations in this country versus other countries. And what we, the American people, have to remember is that we have a foundation that makes us willing to look out for the underdog, willing to extend a hand to those who are in need, willing to be fair. Does it mean that we have always done the right thing? No. Does it mean that our system is perfect? No. But it does mean that it is a system that has allowed more people to escape poverty than any other, that has granted more freedom to more people than any other, and it is a system worth keeping and fighting for. Now, last December, President Trump established the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, which I have the privilege to chair. And there are 13 federal agencies that combine our resources and use that synergy, particularly prioritizing in opportunity zones, such things as grant funding and loan guarantees, infrastructure projects, crime prevention. Opportunity zones bring us hope, and we cannot ignore a major challenge that many of you know all too well, and that is an inadequate supply of affordable housing. And one solution to the affordable housing challenge is to increase the supply. And one of the best ways to do that is to revisit the multitudinous regulatory barriers, the zoning restrictions, and the other things that exist that keep us from being able to build affordable housing. A lot of these things have been on the books for 10, 20, 50, 100 years. They're archaic. They have nothing to do with what's going on today. The density regulations, the height restrictions, all of this garbage. And it just adds so much cost to everything. For single-family homes, National Association of Home Builders estimates those regulatory costs add about 25 to 27% to the cost of the home. That's a big chunk of money. For multifamily, we're talking 32.1%, and in a quarter of cases, up to 42%. That's why you see in some of the cities like Los Angeles, people who are employed living in tents. They can't afford to buy a house or to rent an apartment. These are things that we can do something about. And, you know, many of the costs are invisible to the communities until it comes time to turn the plans into an actual home. With the proper focus, these local regulations can be changed. At HUD, we're doing our part to address the affordable housing shortage by increasing the supply of affordable multifamily housing through a multitude of initiatives. We recently announced the expansion of the low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC pilot, into our new construction and substantial rehabilitation loan products. This new expanded pilot program will streamline the process of FHA insurance application for projects with equity from LIHTC program, and is part of our commitment to further align our policies and the underwriting towards supporting affordable housing production and preservation. We have also created a department-wide landlord task force to reduce the burdensome administrative requirements and encourage more landlords to accept housing choice vouchers. We found some very interesting things in our national listening tour with landlords in terms of why they don't accept vouchers. In one of our major cities, there was great resistance to the vouchers. And then the mayor and the council decided that they would guarantee to the landlords that they would take care of any damage to the property that was caused by the tenants. and the resistance melted away. Now, it ended up that it didn't cost the city very much money because there weren't very many of the tenants who really damaged the property. It's more of a perception than a reality. You know, people who've been waiting for a voucher and waiting to get into an apartment, the last thing they're going to do is do something so that they get themselves kicked out, believe me. But, you know, you have to deal with perception, but it worked. And, you know, it solved the problem in their city. But there are a host of other things, and we're looking at those things. And significantly, we continue to work toward amending the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule, or AFFH, so that it works for local communities instead of working against them. Last year, we withdrew the problematic assessment to fair housing tool for local governments. It was confusing, just added multitudinous layers of bureaucracy. And the tool was so confusing and difficult to use that, you know, a lot of the counties failed the flawed assessment, and they stood the risk of losing critical funding that supported their communities and their most vulnerable families. So we said, let's think about another way that we can use this, and we reopened the rule for public comment. The practice that was being used really encouraged people to move away from the distressed communities to try to move to what they call communities of opportunity. I have no problem with that, but I do have a problem when we put in place policies that make us neglect and move away from the distressed communities instead of fixing the distressed communities. I want people to have choices, choices to live where they want to live, and choices to have a place where their grandmother lives, where their church is, where their heritage is, where their friends are, but make it into a nurturing place, a place that anybody would love to be in, recreating mixed income, mixed profession neighborhoods. And when I look around the country, the places that I've visited, take a place like Eastlake in Atlanta, which used to be one of the worst places that you can possibly come to. And look what's happened with public-private partnerships. Now everybody wants to live there, and it's been going on for 20 years. These are things that we can do. We can do that with our RAD program, which is converting public housing to PBRA units. Over 100,000 of them have been done. This represents the kind of thing that makes a difference in America. $141 million recently to remediate lead-based paint and mold and other hazards in the home. These are the kinds of things that the government should be doing. Homelessness among veterans down 5.4% over the last year. Families with children down 2.7%. And it goes on and on. In fact, if you'd really like to know what we've been doing at HUD, you know, don't listen to the mainstream media, but go to HUD.gov and look at the amazing list of things that have been accomplished, and also look at our Humans at HUD section, which talks about the actual people who benefited from programs. One of the stories I enjoyed the most was a homeless woman who couldn't get a housing choice voucher, finally got one, then she couldn't find any landlords who would accept it. But she eventually got into an apartment, got into our family self-sufficiency program, became a nurse, a homeowner, and a landlord who now accepts housing choice vouchers. So, you know, what a story. Of course, you know, you generally don't hear those kinds of stories from our news media, but it's okay. And I just want to leave you with this thought. You know, when we're looking at the map of America, we may be divided into 3,000 counties, but our name tells the real story, the United States of America. And we need to recognize that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies, that it's okay to disagree with somebody. In fact, I always say if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. And But, you know, we, the American people, are the only ones who can destroy ourselves. ISIS can't destroy us. Russia can't destroy us. China can't destroy us. North Korea can't destroy us. We only can destroy ourselves if we listen to the purveyors of hatred and division. We need not do that. We have something here that everybody wants. You know, people say that our capitalist system is horrible, that we're racist people, we treat people badly. If that was the case, why would people be forming caravans trying to get in here? You know, that doesn't make any sense. And let's remember who we are, what we have, what our ancestors fought for, and let's make sure that we save that for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Yeah. Turn just a little bit here. Well, Mr. Secretary, you were so thorough, I think we've covered most of my questions. But when we think about our audience that's here today, we have very large counties. We have Los Angeles County and San Diego County, Harris County, Texas. But we also have some very small rural counties. When we think about affordable housing, it's a challenge for all of us, large or small.
Right.
Are there some best practices that you've seen across the country, or maybe some other thoughts on how we might attack the affordable housing issue?
Yeah, well, the thing to bear in mind, a lot of people think that, you know, federal regulations are the big barrier, but the vast majority of the regulatory barriers are local. And they've been on the books forever. And the thing that could be done, whether it's a large county or a small county, is to sit down and study those regulations and take the same kind of approach that we have in medicine, which is first do no harm. So look at the regulations, say, is this causing harm when it comes to building affordable housing? And if it is, let's change it. I'm not a person who thinks we need to get rid of every single regulation. Some of them are very useful and very helpful. But just remember, what we have a tendency to do is stack one regulation on top of another. Instead of replacing, we just add. And so you get to a point where to get from point A to point B instead of a straight line, it's a very convoluted pathway of regulations.
Yeah. Thank you. The opiate issue is something that's also creating challenges for counties of all size and east to west, north to south. I had the opportunity of chairing the opiate task force for NACo. We partnered with the National League of Cities. The mayor of Little Rock, Arkansas was our co-chair, my co-chair on that. But when you think about what HUD is doing and the administration's position, and we know there has been a lot of action, other things you might share with us when you look at the opiate challenge and other substance abuse as well?
Well, it's important to understand, first of all, let's not look our noses down on people who are addicted. It is very, very easy to get addicted. And also recognize that opioids are not particularly effective in pain management. If you take somebody who's having a lot of pain and you give them an opioid, and then you ask them, how's your pain? They'll say, it's still there, but I don't care. You know, that's what it does. But it also does the same thing for emotional pain. And see, we have a lot of people with emotional pain, and if you can get relief from that for just a little while, you don't care about it. Guess what? Now all you're thinking about is how do I achieve that feeling again? And that's why the opioids have become such a problem. And we need to recognize that and do everything that we can to fight this problem. But a lot of that comes with giving people real hope and not the kind of despair and hatred that's been pervasive in our society. So it's a broad thing. This administration obviously has directed a lot of attention. There's a multi-agency task force. We're part of that at HUD. And how do we focus on prevention as well as treatment. We have a lot of money that goes toward treatment of people who are addicted. It has to be a comprehensive treatment. It can't be just a little thing, because something actually happens to your brain. There are changes that occur there. And it only takes weeks for those changes to occur. But it takes, on average, 1 to 1.5 years for those changes to be reversed. So when you put somebody into a rehab program for 3 months and they relapse, don't be surprised, because it has to be a much more long-term comprehensive program.
It's amazing how all of these issues that we're talking about are intertwined. We know that if a person is coming out of our county jails, they need housing,
right,
they need a job, and it all does tie together. So when we think about the opportunity zones, and I know you are the point person for the administration and how this is going to come together, how do you see the opportunity zones fitting into this overall opportunity for employment, for housing, et cetera?
Well, you know, the great thing is that we have the Opportunity and Revitalization Council, consisting of 13 different agencies, all of whom have programs designed to help revitalize areas, but they frequently work at cross purposes. Mm-hmm. So by having the council sit down together and amalgamate our programs and synergize our programs so that we focus very specifically on the things that keep us from being able to revitalize, it makes a huge, huge difference. And frankly, recognizing that it is multiple intersecting parts that have to work well together. We need to recognize that there are a lot of people who have given up in our society. They just don't think anybody cares about them. They're not necessarily lazy or bad people. They just have not been exposed to the right kinds of things. Take, for example, the fact that in 30 states, you can gain more from accepting various government subsidies than you can from working a minimum wage job. Well, people say, why should I work when I can get? What they have failed to realize, and what we have to help them to understand, is if you take that job, you gain skills, relationships, opportunities, and you climb that ladder much further and much higher. This is the kind of thing that we used to know in America that is being lost. There are people who are actually trying to move us in just the opposite direction and trying to make people more dependent on government. This is something that we have to fight, but we have to understand what we do and what the long-term consequences of it are. And if we start thinking long-term, how do we get people to a point of self-sufficiency? That's what real compassion is. Compassion is not keeping somebody dependent.
All right. As I hear your comments and as we have this discussion, it's like you have visited my county and you know exactly what we're dealing with. It's really impressive, and we're so pleased that we have a secretary that gets it, that knows it, that understands it, and that's willing to partner with local counties. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for what you all do.
All right. Thank you.